Hi there, this is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, and welcome to another Top 10. Today's Top 10 is Sean Connery films that are not James Bond. Now, I'll admit I'm not the biggest James Bond fan in the world. I'm not quite sure why they keep making them. I only have 2 films from the series. One of them is Live and Let Die, and that's pretty much solely for Yaphet Kotto. And of course, as many of you might guess, I have A View to a Kill, and that's because of Christopher Walken and a little bit of Grace Jones. And that's the only Bond films I have. So obviously Sean Connery is generally known as the best Bond. But I'm not going to argue that. But he has made lots of interesting other little films that are quite far from his Bond persona. Obviously he has great range. He can play a Scots-Russian, or in the case of Ransom, a film in the 70s, a Scots-Swedish hostage negotiator cop. So any dialect, any accent, he can just immediately immerse himself in, and he can become Scots-Irish or Irish-Scots with aplomb and gusto. So let's go through 10 Sean Connery films that are not James Bond. We'll start with a film from 1965. This is The Hill by Sidney Lumet. He made a few films with Sidney Lumet. This one is only available on DVD copies, I believe. This is from 1965. And it's almost like Alan Clark's Scum, but for British World War II criminals who are in the Middle East, and break rules and stuff, so they get sent to essentially a stockade run by Harry Andrews and Ian Bannon. This has one of those usual great British casts in it. Roy Kinnear's in it, who usually plays kind of the comic relief role, but he's actually quite a nasty little character in this. So Sean Connery arrives with the latest bunch of inmates, and some of them have done kind of petty thieving, stolen whiskey or whatever. But Sean Connery is in the stockade for punching a superior officer and essentially refusing to carry out an order. So obviously Harry Andrews is kind of interested in this guy, and he kind of wants to break him. There's a really kind of sadistic sergeant who especially wants to break Sean Connery's character. There's a wonderful turn by the fantastic Ossie Davis, who plays a West Indian British soldier. It's 123 minutes long. It's perhaps a little too long. The hill in the title of the film is kind of a man-made hill, strangely enough, that Harry Andrews has the prisoners build, and as punishment you run up and down it. in the blazing heat, which leads to heat exhaustion. The film has some usual prison film tropes. Sean Connery, who always was a kind of physical actor, he always was a big man, and he is kind of, there's some film roles that he really let his physicality kind of come out, and they'll appear on this list too. But this is certainly one of them. It's quite a dark film. Again, it's Connery who is standing up for the anti-blimpishness of the British Army. He's challenging, some of these orders just don't make sense, and again, that blimpian idea of, you've got to play by the rules in war is just like, a large cricket match and stuff. And he's the kind of new breed of soldier who just doesn't see the sense in a lot of these orders and a lot of the rules. He can quote the rule book back to Harry Andrews, so he knows all the rules, he knows all the laws, but he just sees it as rather farcical and nonsensical at times. It's a grim film. It's black and white. It's kind of shot in a kind of workmanlike fashion. Sidney Lumet was never perhaps the greatest visual filmmaker in the world. It is a brutal film. It's certainly not a feel-good film, but it's certainly worth checking out. Again, it's perhaps a little long, but it is another side to Sean Connery if you're just used to him being suave and sophisticated as James Bond. That's The Hill from 1965. Strangely enough, this is another Sidney Lumet film. This is The Offence. This is the Master of Cinema release. This is from 1972. And this is another departure. This is almost Bad Lieutenant 20 years before Abel Ferrara's film. This is a small film set in a grim northern English town, and Sean Connery plays a jaded, kind of twisted cop who is after a child sex offender who he believes is Ian Bannon, and he interrogates him, hunts him down, and perhaps goes too far. This film also has Trevor Howard in one of his later performances as Connery's boss, who's brought in to investigate the offence. Ian Bannon is really slimy and creepy, and he has kind of wonderful sneering grins as the blood is dripping down his teeth. It's again a really dark film. It is in colour, but it's a kind of greens and browns and greys. There's not a lot of colour to the film. Again, it's shot in a very kind of documentary style in the exteriors around the schools, but when it actually gets into the police station, there is a kind of otherworldly feel to it. It's kind of got that Point Blank-esque kind of strange camera angles and use of slow motion. Again, if you've never seen Sean Connery outside James Bond, his performance here might actually take you by surprise a little, because he is not a likeable character in any way, shape or form. The way he treats his wife, again, because he is a big man, he is like a coiled spring in this film, and his physicality can just erupt into violence at any point, and you really get a sense of a man on the edge. You know, troubled cops are one of Hollywood's favourite kind of tropes, but this is probably as far away from a polished Hollywood film as you can get. Again, not a lot happens, there's not a lot of setups particularly, it's not a huge cast, it's a very claustrophobic film. Again, not a feel-good film. Again, at 112 minutes, it's probably a little long. But if you want to see Sean Connery at his most kind of animalistic and furious, then The Offence is well worth checking out. So at number 8 is a bit of Hollywood cheese. It's the Presidio with Sean Connery, Mark Harmon and Meg Ryan, and Jack Warden, who gives a nice turn. This is complete nonsense, but it's actually rather enjoyable. It's about Mark Harmon investigating a murder at the local army Presidio, and he ends up buddying up, obviously not wanting to, with Sean Connery as they investigate the murder and the plot, which I won't spoil because it's actually quite clever. Again, directed by Peter Hyams, who's one of those directors that has a really nice little career of enjoyable little films, but he's never going to be described as a great director. The friction between Sean Connery and Mark Harmon is quite amusing. They have enjoyable banter. Then obviously Mark Harmon gets involved with Meg Ryan, who's Sean Connery's daughter, which leads to even more friction. It's just an enjoyable little caper. It's nicely shot, and again the lead characters make it a lot of fun. Again, perhaps not Sean Connery's most challenging acting performance, but it's just a lot of fun. The Presidio. Next on the list, it's The Hunt for Red October, where Sean Connery plays a Russian submarine captain. Obviously his Russian is fantastic, he's completely believable as a Russian submarine captain. Directed by John McTiernan. This was after his Predator Die Hard quite amazing run of 3 films. Again, I would certainly make a point of listening to John McTiernan's commentary, because his commentary is really informative. Alec Baldwin plays Jack Ryan, who obviously would later be played by Harrison Ford. It's got nice supporting turns by Tim Curry, believe it or not, and Scott Glenn, Sam Neill, and obviously the always worth the money James Earl Jones. It ranks up the tension very well, as it looks as though Sean Connery is trying to defect with a nuclear submarine. It works from a technical standpoint, even with all the jargon. McTiernan makes it accessible. Connery gives a very stoic performance There's more going on under the surface because he has to present this particular facade to his crew. Again, it's just Hollywood action filmmaking at its very best when they actually could do that well. And it's not flabby, it's not 2.5 hours long. It's just very enjoyable, well made, well shot, and a wonderfully moving Russian performance by Sean Connery. Next on the list is The Man Who Would Be King, or Der Mann, der König sein wollte, if you get the German Blu-ray. This is unusual for Sean Connery, as what happens to his character in the end, which didn't happen very often to Sean Connery characters. I'll leave it at that. This is a film by John Huston, and it's basically a rip-roaring adventure yarn about two guys with dubious pasts and dubious intentions who go into this country to try and get as rich as possible, but it's also kind of a nice metaphor for the British Empire. It's set in 1880. It also stars Christopher Plummer as Rudyard Kipling, who's recording the events and the adventures of these two guys. It does kind of work as a metaphor for the British Empire, because they just go into these little countries to teach one band of people proper soldiering, and then they take off with this army, go from town to town, taking over town to town, and getting rich along the way. So it's essentially about plundering these foreign countries' resources and jewellery and diamonds and whatever they can find. These countries have strange little religions and strange little rituals that's just strictly not Church of England, but they'll kind of teach them how to do proper soldiering. They view them as kind of ignorant and savages, but they'll teach them properly. And they kind of luck into this thing where Sean Connery is deemed to be an ancestor of some king, so all of a sudden he gets treated like a king, strangely enough. That's clues in the title. And they find this vault full of jewellery and gold, so they've pretty much hit the mother lode. They can return to England, being among the richest people in England, but then something odd happens when the power starts going to Connery's head, and he starts believing that he is actually a descendant from a king. He starts creating new laws and passing judgment on people, and Michael Caine just gets more and more kind of disillusioned, and he just wants to go home with all the loot, essentially. But Sean Connery just gets intoxicated with this power, and again they'd kind of promised that they wouldn't drink during this, they wouldn't sleep with women during this, but then Sean Connery decides that the king needs to have a queen so he can have an heir to his throne. It has some nice body humour in it. Again, with all John Huston films, it's perhaps a little overlong, but it does have two great central performances by Michael Caine and Sean Connery, and again, as a view of colonialism and a microcosm of how the British Empire was actually created. It is a nice little film with a kind of undercurrent of darkness to it. And again, it's just one of those Sunday afternoon adventure films. The Man Who Would Be King. Next on the list is another Sidney Lumet collaboration. It's the Anderson tapes, which is on Powerhouse Indicator, and they've got a really nice release of it. This also stars Diane Cannon, Martin Balsam, Alan King, and Christopher Walken in a really early role. This is from 1971. And it's about Anderson, played by Sean Connery, who comes out of prison with Christopher Walken and an old geezer, and the planning of a robbery involving an apartment building, all of which, as soon as he comes out, he's essentially being recorded. So the Anderson tapes is literally the recording of what they're doing, so it's doomed from the start. So we already know as an audience that it's doomed from the start, but we kind of watch and we're hooked in to actually see how it goes wrong. It's a really, again, it's another wonderful little 70s film. Ralph Meeker also turns up as members of the police force. Again, it's Sean Connery not being the nicest guy in the world. He's rough round the edges. You know, his attitude to Diane Cannon is certainly a bit rough round the edges. But because it's Sean Connery, we still kind of, not necessarily root for him, but he's engaging enough. You know, he's not a complete swine. And again, wonderful support from Christopher Walken, obviously, and Martin Balsam. It's really tensely done, and it's a really nice little film. The Anderson tapes. Next on the list, Brian De Palma's Untouchables. Again, you could argue it's not De Palma's, personal vision or anything, but again, the set pieces are wonderful. The script by David Mamet is fantastic. Music by Ennio Morricone. It's almost like a supergroup film. Robert De Niro as Al Capone is fantastic. Kevin Costner in a kind of career-defining role as Elliot Ness, and Sean Connery as the Irish street cop who has all the advice under the sun. It's endlessly quotable. It looks amazing. They're all wearing Giorgio Armani clothes. Again, wonderful set pieces. The bit in Central Station, or Union Station, sorry, which is just a Odessa steps from Battleship Potemkin, cranked up to 10 by De Palma. It's not historically accurate, but it's just a lot of fun. Everybody's having fun. Sean Connery, I think, got the Oscar for it. It's an example of Hollywood at its best, bringing together really good writers, really good director, really good actors, making a polished Hollywood actioner. The Untouchables. Next on the list is a film that I hadn't seen until quite recently, and I was really blown away by it. It's Robin and Marion by Richard Lester. I should have known it would be good because it's by Richard Lester, who also did How I Won the War, which is just one of my favourite films of all time. And The Bed Sitting Room, and The Knack, and the Beatles films, which I haven't watched. This took me by surprise. This is the Robin Hood story, but 20 years after his legend was created. So he and Little John, played by Nicola Williamson, is in France, still fighting for King Richard, which is a hilarious turn by Richard Harris. I mean, the cast in this film is just incredible. But he's tired. He's fed up of King Richard just slaughtering people for no reason. So he comes back to England, and he finds out that Marion is actually now a nun. So he tries to get her back, and through one reason or another, they get the band back together, and they have kind of one last adventure. I mean, the cast is ridiculous. It's Sean Connery, Audrey Hepburn as Marion, and again, so they're an older couple, and obviously I'm not a romantic, but it is actually quite a romantic little film for featuring people who are older and more, well, not necessarily more mature in Robin Hood's case, but it's a kind of romance that we don't generally see in films for like older people or middle-aged people. But the cast: Sean Connery, Audrey Hepburn, Nicole Williamson, Denham Elliott turns up, Ronnie Barker, the genius of the two Ronnies. He turns up as Friar Tuck, because you're taken aback and going, "My God, that is Ronnie Barker." Ian Holm turns up as King John in a small cameo near the end. And Robert Shaw is the Sheriff of Nottingham, and Robert Shaw is just having an absolute blast. So it's just a group of people, group of actors just having an absolute ball. Richard Lester keeps it moving along. The action, when it comes, is realistic. Robin Hood and the Sheriff of Nottingham have, one last sword fight, and again, it's how it would actually be. It's more realistic. It's not all kind of swinging on ropes from parts of the castle and stuff like that. It's more clanky and clunky. It's choreographed, so it doesn't actually look choreographed, because real life battles wouldn't be, this amazing choreography. It's an earthy film, it's rough around the edges, but that just kind of increases its charm. I was just absolutely blown away by it, and it has an ending that I really liked and is in line with my kind of ending. So if you haven't seen it, I would highly recommend it. You will have a fantastic time with it. Again, one of the greatest casts ever assembled. It's absolutely fantastic. Robin and Marion. Second on the list is a film that I saw years ago and was kind of puzzled and confused by it, but it always kind of stuck in your mind. It's kind of one of those films where you do feel, did I actually dream it, or was that actually in a film? And it's John Boorman's Zardoz. This is completely bizarre. Again, from 1973, it's Sean Connery at his most animalistic. He runs about with a red nappy on for most of the film. He's at his most brutal. I did a random review of it a long time ago. It's science fiction. It's mixed in with the same kind of lore as David Lynch's Wild at Heart. Not giving too much away. The clues in the title. It's just... and Arrow have done a fantastic job on this Blu-ray. And again, the commentary by John Boorman, you have to listen to because it's just wonderful. Again, it's set in 2293. You have the brutals, you have the farmers, and then you have this higher class who live in this kind of paradise. And Sean Connery is this brutal who erupts into this society, and he wants to kind of learn the truth. It's got so many ideas going on in it. You could argue that perhaps they kind of weigh each other down because there's just so much in it. There's so many ideas going on. As a study of morality, and as a study of society, and as a study of mortality, it's just wonderful. There's so many great moments in it. There's a nice turn by Charlotte Rampling. It's a smorgasbord of ideas, and it's wonderful. If you haven't seen Zardoz, go check it out. I do think it's actually stood the test of time. Again, when I saw it when I was younger, I just had no clue what was going on. But actually seeing it again, it's just wonderful. And a really tough, brutal, rowdy performance by Sean Connery. Which leads me to number one. Sean Connery film that's not James Bond. And it's Outland, which I absolutely love. Again, this is a film that I saw a long time ago, and whenever it would be on television, it was always dark and murky. But a few years ago I got the German Blu-ray, and then this is the HMV Premium Collection Blu-ray, and my goodness, what a difference. They've cleaned it up so much, because it was a relatively expensive film, but whenever you saw it on TV or VHS, you couldn't actually tell what was going on a lot of the time. You couldn't really tell what the sets kind of looked like because it was just so dark and just so murky. And then it came out in Blu-ray, and it's like a whole different film. You can see where the money was spent in the production design, on the sets. It's set in a mining town in space. You can almost see this would be where the crew from Alien might deposit a cargo or pick up a cargo. It's got that grimy feeling. It's from 1981, I believe. Again, directed by Peter Hyams. who did the Presidio, and Capricorn 1, I believe. So it has that same kind of grimy, greasy feeling of Alien. And again, I think it's kind of nice to think that they're almost in the same universe. It's, some people have called it High Noon in Space, which is a kind of fair comparison. Apart from it's probably more enjoyable than High Noon. James Seeking gives nice support. Stephen Berkoff turns up. Miners keep dying and going mad, and Sean Connery is the new sheriff in town, essentially, the new marshal, trying to find out what's going on. Peter Boyle gives a wonderful turn as kind of the head of the mining town, or the mining complex, who's obviously a bit shady, but he does do nice little veiled threats very well. Probably the standout performance is Francis Sternhagen as the jaded, cynical doctor that Sean Connery ends up kind of befriending and finding out. She helps him find out what the hell's going on. The relationship and the banter between the two characters is just fantastic, and it's amongst the best banter in science fiction cinema history. Sean Connery gives a nice little performance as somebody whose career is hurting his family life. His wife and kid leave him during the film just because they've had enough. He internalises a lot. You do get the feeling this is a man alone, even though he's married with a kid. And there's some level that actually willingly pushes them away. Yeah, it's a really nice film. It's an underrated film. It has kind of cult film written all over it. But I think from the TV and VHS days to now the Blu-ray release, you actually see, what a great little film it actually is. It's one of those Blu-rays that is an essential purchase. A lot of films don't really gain much from Blu-ray because they've had kind of good prints before. But Outland is certainly one that benefits greatly from the Blu-ray release. So that's Outland. And that was 10 films with Sean Connery that aren't James Bond. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Please leave comments below of your top 10 films with Sean Connery that aren't James Bond. Or even rank your top 10 Sean Connery James Bond films. Was he in 10? I'm not sure. So thanks so much for watching. And hopefully we'll see you again for more top 10s. This is Solitude Ronan saying farewell.